Have you ever wondered how different pro photographers would edit the same RAW file? Well, let me answer this question with this video. As always, to quickly navigate through the video, make sure to use the chapters below. I have reached out to several pros in the landscape photography niche to edit this RAW file in their style. For this challenge I also did not set up any rules in regards of the editing. Everything goes. Participants were allowed to either use just one of the RAW files or make use of all 5 of them to do exposure blending or do some HDR merging. So first we will compare the different results coming from the pros. Then I'll show you my version and how I have edited it. And finally we will also take a look at your edits, because to get a wider range of results I wanted to include the viewers as well. If you missed the chance to participate, I suggest downloading the RAW file first and give it a try yourself before watching the upcoming results and see how your version compares to the others. These are the pro photographers participating in this year's challenge. Bagshaw is a great landscape photographer and master of advanced Photoshop editing techniques. He can do crazy things with the TK panel, and he's my go-to YouTube source for when I want to learn those techniques. Breitung is a fellow photographer from Germany with huge editing knowledge. You might have already read a few of his articles on the F-Stoppers website. His editing style is more on the natural side, and he has a great library of useful content on his YouTube channel. Denney has been a huge influence on my photography career, as I love his kind of high-key, dreamy editing style. There's always something to learn watching his YouTube videos, as he not only covers the editing side, but also show on location videos, general photography guides, and talks about gear every now and then. If you're looking for something photography related to binge watch, Matt's YouTube channel has high quality content and is a great source for inspirational content as well. Just like Mark, he covers a wide range of topics, plus he has helpful photo location videos for different countries, which I personally love to use to plan my trips. The great thing about videos like this is I get to discover a lot of hugely talented photographers. This was the case with Oppelt, who quickly became one of my favorite Instagram photographers. Taking a look at her profile reveals masterfully edited landscape images that are truly breathtaking. Just like Laura, I also discovered Isabella Tabacchi while researching for this video. I instantly became a huge fan, and I love getting inspiration from her gallery with her unique editing style. Lukas has the most impressive Dolomites portfolio, showing a unique and very contrasty editing style with super clean images, and every time I have the desire to go into the mountains I check out his amazing work to get pumped for the next upcoming trip. So let's start with Sean's version. And after we went through all the different images, make sure to share with us which edit you like the most and why. Sean's version is the most natural of all the entries, I would say. This is pretty much how I saw the scene in person, except maybe for the very subtle magenta in the shadows. We do have some very vibrant clouds in the sky, but if the conditions are right, you can get these ultra-saturated colors during sunrise or sunset. The exposure is well balanced. Sean maintained the highlights in the sky without overexposing them, while simultaneously having nice details in the shadows. Now, what's really tricky for this image is to get the exposure blending right in the sky because of these clouds. Using Lightroom's HDR tool, I struggled a lot to get a clean blend. However, in this case it looks perfect. How do I know there is exposure blending involved? Well, Sean is the guy for TK panel tutorials, which is a great tool to do these kinds of things. Plus, the image looks so wonderfully clean, I don't think that's doable with a single exposure. With Michael's version, we do have another more natural edit. However, Michael went for a much colder look, which in my opinion looks great for this mountain landscape, since we already have these dark, cold mountains in the back of the scene. The thing I like the most about this version is how nicely the color contrast between the red clouds and the blue sky reflects in the water. This really makes this image pop. And right away, this is a great example why this video is so helpful. I personally would have never thought about a colder look for this scene, as I instinctively always go for a warmer look with my sunrise shots. Seeing this version really opens up your eyes for other directions, as this edit clearly works as well. Michael was also kind enough to write me a brief breakdown of the editing process, so I know for a fact we are looking at another exposure blended version. Looking up at the clouds, this exposure blending was done perfectly. Mark is probably one of the best photo editing teachers on YouTube, so I was really looking forward to see what he would be turning this image into. Unfortunately, we had a little bit of a hiccup with the file transfer, that's why I only have this rather small sized image to show here. Nonetheless, we can get a clear idea of the editing here. Mark went for a very bright and dreamy style, kind of the opposite of Michael's and Isabella's version, which we are looking at later. We have a very strong glow effect applied, which again makes sense with a bright shot like this. And again, we can see there is less glow within the dark areas, especially on the left side. Although we are looking at a very bright version, there is still no overexposure. So that means Mark handled the highlights with care, pushing them as strong as possible without clipping. For dark areas, participants correctly choose to go with a colder white balance, so it does make sense that Mark went for the warmer temperature with this bright version. As I had my first look at Matt's version, I was quite surprised, since instead of one edited RAW file, he sent me two separate images. And this is another approach which I would have never thought about. I do like to crop images heavily from time to time, but splitting them up like this is something I never have done before. To me, this just shows so much creativity. Now with Matt's edit, we are looking at two completely different versions. We have the cold, dark looking shot on the left, while the image on the right has much more warmth. And it does look much friendlier and open, as there is this bright area in the sky right in the center of the frame, which is not blocked by any mountains. So these two versions each deliver a very different mood. The editing itself is also really nicely done. The exposure looks well balanced for each side with beautifully recovered highlights, and again, taking a closer look at the clouds reveals some more finer details which Mats have kept after the editing process. Overall, both sides are more on the colder side, which indicates that Mats has lowered the white balance temperature without going too crazy to keep some of those warmer tones on the right. With Laura's version, we have a dreamy, glowing looking scene with beautiful highlights and darker shadows. Looking closely, you can see the glow in this image is coming from behind, from the bright parts of the sky just above that hill, while there isn't much glow going on in the shadows. This is a crucial part of creating a convincing effect, and it's beautifully done in this case. You can also see how the distant mountains are slightly less contrasty compared to the mountains closer to the camera. Again, something that really helps delivering this dreamy effect. The one thing I really love about this edit is how Laura handled the clouds. I know I have been praising the clouds of every edit so far, but in this case they do look extra good. Not only are these very nicely separated from the blue sky, but also the colors look so good with the reduced blue tones and the subtle red-orange in here. Overall, we are again looking at a warmer version once more, which to me always works great with those glowing, dreamy effects applied. Isabella's entry is a lot darker and grimmer compared to the other versions, which to me is a great choice as it adds more variance to this whole experiment. But we also have some light coming in from behind that hill. To me, this helps to balance the image in a nice way, since you have those very big but dark mountains on the left compared to the smaller mountains on the right with the sun rising behind them. It makes the picture look a little more even, if that makes sense. As Isabella went for the dark look, it also makes sense to use a very cold white balance, like she did. But we still get to see a hint of warmth in the clouds, which again helps adding some color contrast and just making this version so well balanced. If you wouldn't have these warm tones in the sky, the image would be much less interesting, I would say. Again, I want to point out just how helpful it is to see drastically different versions of the same image. Seeing this image with the dark, cold style applied helps so much to try and learn different editing approaches. One really cool effect I wish I would have thought about can be seen in Lukas' version. Behind the first hill, in front of these distant mountains, you can see a very subtle light ray coming from the brightest spot of the sky, going both directions, without overlapping that hill in the foreground. This looks so gorgeous. Plus, Lukas has created an extra bright spot just above that hill, which makes it seem like the sun is just about to rise above it, and with the dark foreground, this gives this area in particular a lot more punch. The whole upper area also has a very subtle dreamy effect added on top, which, just like in Laura's version, looks so good. In general, Lukas applied a lot more contrast with deeper shadows in the foreground, as well as in the clouds. Color-wise, we have a beautiful balance of warmer tones in the highlights against these colder tones in the shadows, and some rich greens in the foreground. It's very nicely done and not too saturated. It's just that right level of vibrance. These people know how to edit, but they are also fantastic photographers with skills that take years to learn. If you want to improve your photography skills and speed up the learning process, or dive deeper into different niches of the photography world, film, illustration, animation or design, you might want to check out Skillshare, the sponsor of this video. Skillshare is the largest online learning community for creatives. Here you'll find thousands of creative classes taught by industry experts in numerous categories ranging from beginner to advanced. Thanks to this class by one of the biggest YouTuber, Marques Brownlee, I have been able to improve the quality of my videos tremendously. Not only for my YouTube channel, but also for the customers outside of YouTube I work with. The first 500 people to use my link in the description will receive 1 month free trial of Skillshare. So get started today. Now that we have taken a look at all the different versions, let me show you my edit. I wanted this shot to give off a rather warm sunrise feeling, so I did work with a lot of red, orange and yellow tones. At the same time, I went for a more desaturated look this time because I thought it looks good. However, after seeing all the other edits, I might go back on that and bring up the saturation for the highlights a notch. I did create a super bright and partly overexposed spot right above that hill to add a super contrasty element. I did overexpose on purpose as there are no interesting details anyways, so I'm not really losing anything in here. To further work on the bright spot, I also brushed in a bit of glow with Photoshop to get that light spill effect, but other than that I try to not use too much glow overall. But I think it's the best to explain my intentions while editing the image. So let's take a look at the post-processing and feel free to follow along. Now for my version, I want to start things in Lightroom. And first, I'm taking advantage of the dynamic range of all 5 images. That means I'm going to merge an HDR first. So down here in the film strip, I'm going to select these 5 images, right click on one of them, go to Photo Merge and choose HDR. Here all I'm doing is to make sure to check Auto Align, but besides that I don't need to change anything. And once that is done, let's hit the merge button. We will end up with this image on which we can now work on. So let's start with the basic adjustments. I'd like to change the profile first, going from Adobe Color to Adobe Standard. If you pay close attention, you can see this will make the darkest areas just a little bit brighter. That's because this is a more flat profile than Adobe Color. And what this means is it does lessen the contrast a bit, and thus we just have some brighter dark areas in this image. So this already helps fixing the exposure very slightly. Then for the next step, I want to bring down the exposure, and I'm doing this because the sky at this point is really overexposed and blown out. By bringing down the exposure, we can reveal more of these warmer tones in the sky, which is exactly what I want. I'm also going to bring down the highlights for the exact same reason, plus bringing down the highlights will reveal more of the cloud structure up in the sky. Of course, these two steps will make the whole image a lot darker. We want to counter that, and I'm going to bring up the shadows for that reason. I'm also going to increase the blacks, and as I increase the blacks, looking at this histogram, you can see we nicely can fix the underexposure of this image. Also, this again will lessen the contrast, and it will also create a very soft look, which I'm aiming for this image. I want to make a rather dreamy warm scene, so increasing the blacks helps quite a lot for this shot. Okay, exposure wise I'm quite happy, and the histogram looks really good actually. So what I want to do next is to adjust the white balance. At the moment I think this shot is really cold. I want to change that by bringing up the temperature. So let's bring it up to right around here. I think that looks great. And then I'm going to add some texture. This will sharpen the image, and then to further introduce some softness, or let's say some glowing look on top of this image, I'm going to bring down the clarity very gently. And I'm also going to bring down the dehaze. Just like this. Perfect. And of course I want this image to be well saturated, so I'm going to bring up the vibrance and the saturation. Wonderful. That's it for the basic adjustments. Now let's do a little bit of masking, because I want to target certain areas of the image and apply some very specific changes to these areas. Open up the masking panel. And I guess we will start changing the landscape in the foreground without affecting the sky. So how do we do that? We're going to create a sky selection. And at the moment, this mask is not as precise as I need it to be. So I want to further adjust that. I'm going to click on those three dots. I'm going to intersect mask with, and I'm going to choose select sky once more. I'm intersecting a sky mask with another sky mask. This might sound strange, but it really helps to get a more precise selection for the sky. But we want to change the foreground, so there is one more step we need to take. Again, I'm clicking on those three dots and I'm choosing invert mask 1 right here. And just like that, we have selected all the landscape in the foreground. I actually don't want to change much. I just want to very gently bump up the exposure a little bit, getting out some more details of the darkest areas this way. And then let's continue creating a linear gradient. With this one, I want to target this grass patch right in the foreground. So something like this. That's not a very precise mask. We are affecting parts of the water as well, but I don't think it matters much. So here I'm going to bring up the exposure. Let's not raise it that much, but right around here looks good. I'm also increasing the shadows. This really helps for more details in here. And I do want to increase the clarity, giving this particular spot some more punch. Alright, this looks much better already. But I want to use another linear gradient covering the foreground up to that hill in the middle above the water. And what I want to do in here is to add some more overall clarity. This will help make the reflection look a little more interesting, and that's about it for this mask. Now let's add some contrast to the sky. I'm going to choose a color range mask. and I'm trying to click right in here in the blue tones of the sky. Again, we are affecting way more than needed, so let's click on those three dots one more time, choose intersect mask width and choose select sky, so we only target the sky with this mask. Alright, now you can see it does look kind of funny around those clouds, because Lightroom has a hard time selecting the blue tones around these edges. I'm going to further modify the color range mask by making use of that refine slider. I'm going to bring up the refine slider here, and thus we are kind of making the edge between the blue sky and the clouds a little softer. Also, I want to subtract a radial gradient right here at the brightest part of the sky, because I don't want to change this area. I do want to change the rest of the sky though. And with the mask set up, what I'm going to do is to bring down the exposure. I'm also going to add some contrast, and let's bring down the blacks. Maybe bring the exposure down a little more, but this is looking really, really good. All right. Then I want to work on the bright part of the sky. Again, I'm using a sky selection, and again, I want to make use of that intersect tool. So intersect mask width and choose the radial gradient. Now I'm going to draw the radial gradient right here in the brightest part of the sky, because I want to make this area just a little bit brighter. And to do that, I am going to bring up the exposure, and I'm also going to bring up the temperature. This way we can introduce some more warmth to this particular spot. Alright, this looks great. Now, what I want to do as well on this area is to add a bit of glow. So I'm going to choose another radial gradient, and I'm covering this area like this. I want to make sure the radial gradient is overlapping the mountains. And in here, I'm simply going to raise the blacks. This helps since we're overlapping the mountain. So not the sky will get brighter, but the areas on the mountain faces, which we are including in this radial gradient. And thus we are creating this glow effect. I'm also going to bring down the dehaze to make this a little stronger. Alright, this looks great, and we can introduce some more temperature, making this glow a little warmer. Perfect. Now let me try to target the mountains in the back. I hope this works using an objects selection mask, and I'm going to activate the rectangle select mode here. Now what I want to do is to draw a rectangle around the mountain in the back, and let's see if this works. It does work pretty good. I also want to add another objects mask, again with the rectangle select mode active, and let's draw a rectangle around the mountain on the other side. Lovely, this works as well. So that's a perfect selection for these mountains. What I want to do is to add more contrast by making these mountains a little bit darker. So I'm going to drop the exposure. I'm also going to bring up the contrast. And I want to bring down the shadows. And just like that, we have really nicely separated these mountains a little more from the rest of the image. Then let me also target this area in the foreground. For that, let me choose another color range mask, and I'm clicking right in here in some of these green areas. Obviously, this is way too wide of a selection, so I'm making use of the refine slider once more. And let's bring it down a little bit. I can also say subtract and choose linear gradient to get rid of the foreground like this. I can also say subtract linear gradient and take out this mountain on the left like this. And let's subtract objects selection and just select the mountain on the right. Okay, this is looking like a proper selection. All I want to do in here is to add some more clarity like this, and I want to add some more whites, brightening up this spot as well. Alright, and that's the image after the masking adjustments. We can take a look at before real quick. We started with this, and we nicely added contrast and gave this image a lot more punch with some masking. Then let's do some color grading and starting this in the color mixer. Let me start with the hue, because I personally just don't like these yellow sunrise colors. For that reason, I'm going to bring down the yellow hue, making them appear to be a little more orange. And I'm also going to bring down the orange hue just a little bit. That's just a personal thing. I prefer the colors this way. Also, I'm going to head into the saturation tab and I want to boost these two color tones. So let's bring up orange and yellow. And we can head into the luminance tab to make the sky a little darker by bringing down the blue luminance. Wonderful. Now let's do some split toning in the color grading tab, and that's where we can really stylize kind of the color grading of this image. So what I want to do is to start in the highlights, and I'm going to apply a very warm hue because of course we want to keep the highlights warm. So I'm going somewhere right here in the orange color range. I'm going to heavily bring up the saturation. Let's go with something like this. I really like how this looks on this image. Then let's go into the midtones, and again I want the midtones to be warm. So I'm going somewhere in that color range again. Right around here looks good to me, and I'm going to bring up the saturation once more. This looks really good. We can introduce some color contrast by making use of the shadows, and here instead of a warm color tone, we can apply a cold color tone. So set up the hue in that way, some in the blue range right around here. However, I'm not going to raise the saturation as much. Let's just bring it up a notch like this. Done. And you can see the split toning does make the image look so much better. Now we can do some final color grading in the calibration tab. And here I'm just always playing around with these sliders because they are confusing, and I'm just always going to start with the blue primary hue, bringing it down quite a bit, and I'm also going to bring up the saturation here. While we're at it, let's also bring up saturation for green and red. Alright, that's looking really good. Then I also want to sharpen this image in the details tab, so let's do this real quick, and I'm always using the same settings for the sharpening. I'm starting by bringing down the radius all the way down, then increase the details all the way up, apply some masking, while holding down the Alt key so we can see where the sharpening is applied, just like this, and then I'm going to bring up the amount of sharpening a notch, and we are done with the sharpening, and that's the image after the Lightroom adjustments. Now I want to take this shot a little further and do some finer adjustments in Photoshop. So let's right click on the image, go to Edit In and choose Photoshop. And what I want to do first is I want to apply an adjustment layer right down here. And what I want to use is a photo filter. The default photo filter will warm up the image just like this. As you can see, it's very subtle, but it looks really good on most sunset and sunrise images. Then I want to get rid of that ugly vignetting in the top corners of the image. I'm going to hit Ctrl-Shift-Alt-E to merge those two layers. Now let's zoom in. I'm going to use the clone stem tool here. I'm copying an area from right next to it, and I'm just brushing over the vignetting. Just like this. And let's repeat this on the other side. Wonderful. At this point, I want to enhance that glow effect in the center. I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm switching the blending mode to hard light. Then I'm grabbing the brush by pressing B, and with the brush active, I'm holding down the Alt key, and I'm clicking right in here where I want to apply the glow effect, because this way I can pick up that color tone, and I want that glow to have the same color tone as the sky. Also important, make sure to set the brush opacity to something really low, like 10%, otherwise that glow effect will be too strong. Now with the brush setup, I'm going to paint in a few times right around that mountain. And what I want to do as well is some dodging. So let me create a new layer, and for dodging I'm always using the overlay blending mode. Softlight works as well. Now I want to target certain luminance ranges of the image, therefore I'm using the TK panel plugin, which allows me to create luminosity masks. I first want to work on the highlights, so let me try the lights 1 mask, which is a very wide range. I think this will work quite good on this image, so I'm activating the layer mask mode, and let's click on lights 1 more time. This way we are getting our luminosity mask applied on our overlay layer. Then with the brush tool active, I'm going to set the foreground color to white since we want to make areas brighter. And I'm going to bring up the brush opacity a bit. And then let's paint over some areas I want to brighten up. Right here, that grass patch. Maybe even the reflection a little bit. And maybe some of these mountains in the back as well. I just don't want to affect the sky. In fact, I actually want to select our base image layer, go to select and choose sky. And with that selection, I'm going back to our luminosity mask, layer mask, then hit Shift F5 and choose black. This way we are making sure the sky is taken out of this dodging layer. And this way we can safely brush over the mountains without making the skies brighter. Alright, and there we have it. This is the image how I have edited it with this heavy glow effect coming from behind the mountains, and most of these things were done in Lightroom. Finally, let's also take a look at your versions. And at this point I want to thank you all for all the awesome entries, which makes this video so much more interesting. By the way, I want to apologize in advance if I pronounce the following names wrong. Let's start with Gabrisim. Here we have another beautiful glow effect without the glow destroying the shadows. Overall, this is another darker version. Still, there is no underexposure present. We do have nicely visible details even in the darkest spots of the image. The color balance looks great with the warmer overall look, but we still have some cold tones, especially on the left side. Plus, the colors are nicely saturated. James' version is pretty close to my one, with the super bright spot and the glow effect, right here in the sky. Overall, it looks really dreamy with soft shadows. Still, we're not losing any sharpness or details in those darker spots, which is really nicely done. It appears James also introduced some subtle light ray coming in from behind that hill, which looks really good. Color-wise, it's more on the warmer side, with a hint of magenta in the shadows, but overall less saturated, just like in my version. This edit comes from a user named M. I really hoped someone would crop the image in this way, because I was thinking about doing this exact same thing a lot. With the reflection in the water, this creates an awesome symmetry. After all, the grassy patch in the foreground isn't really needed, and cropping it out works just fine, as you can see right here. We do have some blown out parts in the sky overall. It's like a high-key version where even in the shadows we have rich details. Medianopol's version is another dark edit. Still, it doesn't seem like there is too much clipping in the darkest spots, while we do have these beautiful highlights in the sky. There seems to be a bit of glow around those bright spots, and it appears that there is some kind of fog effect applied right here in front of those distant mountains. That is a great idea. I'm surprised there's only one entry with added elements, but I'm happy there is one. Nancy's version obviously is over the top editing wise, but remember, there are no rules, and the one most important thing is that you are happy with what you have created. And hopefully we can all learn something from these different versions. Who doesn't love cats? It's not something that I would have added, but if I were to do that, this lovely cat right here should be a tiny bit bigger to fit the scale of the scene. Right now it looks a little bit too small. Fishes like that can be an interesting element, but it's kind of hard to get them to look natural with that reflection going on. In this case, it would really help to lower the opacity of those fishes to make them kind of shimmer through the water surface. Now, on location, I was actually looking around for flowers like these that I could include because those make up a great foreground element. Unfortunately, there weren't any around. If I wanted to do it this way, I would have made them just a bit smaller. Otherwise, they are kind of throwing off the balance of the composition as they are pulling the viewer's eye down to them. With Nathanknows version we have another high key edit with lots of details in the darkest parts of the scene. However, he has nicely saved those highlights. As you can see, those are not overexposed. This means we are looking at a version with a bit less contrast, which leads to a soft and dreamy looking image. His version has less saturated colors, but overall it's a version with a warmer white balance once more. This edit from Professional Wave 422 comes with a lot of contrast and in general looks super clean and sharp. That's especially visible in the foreground with the grassy patch and the small hill in the center. Still, there is a little bit of glow right on top in front of the brightest part of the sky. What I'm noticing is the clouds in the sky look darker than in the reflection. I personally don't have an issue with that, as I'm doing these kind of things often as well when I edit. This version is a little colder and it's also darker with some warmer tones left in the clouds. Another contrasty but this time rather high key version comes from Robin X. In the shadows there is a lot of detail revealed, while we do have some super bright highlights as well, but there doesn't seem to be too much overexposure. The whole edit is noticeably warmer, which looks really nice for a bright scene like this. And here we have another darker edit coming from Run Puzzle Headed 4826. What I really like about this version is the intense color of the clouds against the blue cyan tones of the sky. I also like how the hill in the foreground was intentionally made a lot darker to create some kind of silhouette effect. This works great with the mountain in the back. Unfortunately, we can spot the edge of the mask used along the hill if we look closely, but this can be fixed with some more precise masking. I really like the direction this edit is going. This version, entered by Sandro Bedin, is another well-balanced edit. We see details in the shadows and the highlights, while the image still offers a nice amount of contrast. This is another warmer image with beautiful colors in the clouds and subtle hint of blue on the darker left side. Notice how Sandro slightly cropped the bottom part, which I think was a great decision overall, since I think it makes the whole composition look much better. Simon's edit has a strong glowing look applied as well, without affecting the shadows too much. You can clearly see that once more on the left side in the darker spots. The highlights above the small hill in the foreground seem to be very slightly overexposed. As I mentioned, when working on my version, I think it's totally fine as long as we're not losing any vital information in here. Colorwise, the warmer look was chosen again, but this time we do have some richer green-yellow tones in the grass. This version by Tiny Warthog 1927 looks pretty unique. I love the desaturated blue tones, which are shifted more into the cyan color range, making them almost look gray. It works well together with the warmth of the clouds, where it looks like the saturation of the warmer tones was actually boosted a bit. Highlights are nicely preserved as well, and we have good visible details in the shadows. Also, it looks like there might be some grain added on top, not something that I personally would do, but I think it looks good for this scene. Here we're looking at a very grungy kind of style from Upstairs Safety 857. The image has strong contrast, but it doesn't appear to have overexposed highlights or underexposed shadows. It's certainly on the colder side, which is especially visible in the mountain range in the distance. Still, we have a bit of warmth left up in the clouds. Also, this edit has some richer green tones in the foreground. Probably the most contrasty image of this video comes from Xremi 2137. While we do have some noticeable underexposure in the landscape, this more heavy-handed style can certainly be used, maybe if you use this image as a design element complementing something like a website or a magazine. This version also is rather desaturated with subtle blue tones and some more visible warm orange and yellow tones in the sky. Also, we have a tiny glowing area right in the brightest part of the sky above that hill. So now that we went through all the images, what has been your favorite version? Also, did you give it a try yourself? If you want to share it, feel free to visit the subreddit I have created for this editing challenge and post it there. I hope you all enjoyed this video as much as I have, and hopefully see you all next time.